We've compared the biggest RC trucks Traxxas offers, the X-Maxx and the XRT, and I'm convinced the XRT is the better truck, which I'll explain more in a minute. But after driving them back to back, is the XRT more fun? Well, that's the question. Let me just start by saying these are both extremely awesome RC trucks with lots of power, four-wheel drive trains, and large go-anywhere attitudes, as they should since they're both 6-scale vehicles weighing nearly 20 pounds each. These trucks are almost the same truck too, although there are some big differences to their suspensions, which leads to very different driving characteristics. But for the best out-of-the-box bang for the buck, considering these are $1,000 RC trucks, I think the XRT is the better truck. Why? Well, there are a few good reasons. First, the XRT comes with the updated clipless body fastening system. As many of you know, the X-Maxx uses like this tongue system that hooks underneath the front shock tower, and it works pretty dang good, but under really heavy extreme crashes, the X-Maxx body pops off. The XRT is just a newer truck, and it uses the newer system which clips in at each corner, and so far we've never had the XRT body pop off. Both systems are pretty dang good to begin with, but the XRT's clipless system, the latest gen, is just better. The XRT also uses the more updated battery fastening system over the X-Maxx, where the flap actually opens from the inside rather than the outside, and when it closes, there's a little spot to put a body clip, and when you do, it locks that battery fastening system in place. So under really heavy extreme crashes, the batteries in the XRT aren't gonna pop out. It's a system that we first saw on the Traxxas Sledge, and it works really dang well at securing those batteries as long as you put in that body clip. Another reason the XRT is better than the X-Maxx is because it has a more refined or updated motor heatsink. This aluminum heatsink, I believe they're calling the low profile heatsink, and it's got a double fan design to it. So there's double the cooling, pulling heat away from that heatsink. This heatsink has got two flat spots on it because of this. It has taller fins, so there's more surface area to absorb the heat away from the motor. And yeah, you can just put two fans on there, and that's the way it comes out of the box. For a lot of people, depending on their climates, this isn't going to be such an issue, but for people who live in really hot areas like us, we're in Northern California where it can get 110 degrees in the summer. Having a better motor cooling system is an advantage, and the XRT motor cooling is just better. Another reason why I think the XRT is the better truck out of the box is because since it is newer, it has some better updated, more refined suspension parts over the X-Maxx. On the X-Maxx steering carrier, you've got these walls here on the edges, but it's thinned out with less material where that pin goes through. On the XRT, it's all solid with material, nothing is thinned out. It's kind of big and beefy. On the steering block for the X-Maxx, again, it's kind of walled where the perimeters are, but there's lots of material that's been removed in here with lots of little pockets going around. On the XRT, it's all kind of been filled in. Big walls going around the side. This is all filled in with material and going all the way around. Everything's been filled in. There, you can kind of get a look at both of them. X-Maxx on top. Big difference, and that should change durability. On the upper arm as well. On the X-Maxx, the upper arm's got these pockets. There's less material, but on the XRT, it's all been filled in. There's a lot more material in there to take hits. The rear hubs, it's the same situation. On the X-Maxx, it's again walled off with different pockets of material gone. But on the XRT, that is one solid hub full of plastic, and that should be a lot more durable than the rear hub on the X-Maxx. Another important reason, and a rather expensive one, is that the XRT comes with the Wide Max kit out of the box. That makes the XRT wider than the X-Maxx, even though they have the same wheelbase, which provides a lot of different driving characteristics and behaviors to it. You can add the Wide Max kit to the X-Maxx, but it's going to cost you about $200. But when you do, it provides the updated suspension arms where there's more material, and that upper and lower suspension arm are just a little bit beefier than the stock parts. And the last reason I think the XRT is going to be the better out-of-the-box truck is because it's a little bit heavier. Not by much, The XRT is about 21 pounds, where the X-Maxx is about 19, but there's going to be the wide max kit on here. There's more material to the parts. The drive shafts going to each axle are going to be longer. That's more steel. It has a different heatsink and double the fans, so there's just a little bit more weight and heft to this truck, which can have some big benefits when you drive it. Now, you could take those updated parts from the XRT and put them on the X-Maxx, but it's gonna cost you some dough. You can't add the body fastening or the battery fastening, but the suspension parts, the motor cooling, and the wide max, you totally could. Now, I've added up all the parts and we put them in a shopping cart at AMain Hobbies, and it's about $300. It may be worth it to do this to the X-Maxx, or it may not. At the minimum, I would add those 3 suspension parts, and they're not that expensive at about $25 for the 3 packages. Although, if it's not broke now, don't fix it, but when you do, get the upgraded versions. So that's why I think the XRT is the better truck, but the truck and those parts are just one element to the overall experience and fun that you're gonna have with one of these trucks. Which leads me to, what do they like to drive? Well, as most of you already know, these trucks drive very differently from each other. On this blacktop surface, which is a slick blacktop, traction isn't that great. The X-Maxx is true to its monster truck design. It's like a lifted truck. It sits high, it has a high center of gravity, and the body just sways and leans all over the place. Squeeze the trigger, and the X-Maxx just naturally would do a wheelie. Turn too hard, and the X-Maxx will go up on 2 wheels or roll over on you. The XRT, on the other hand, is more like a sporty, low-sitting truck where it hugs the ground, it doesn't have nearly as much body roll, and it's a whole lot more controllable, or just more stable. Now, since traction levels aren't too high out here, both trucks do slide around quite a bit. One thing about the X-Maxx, though, is it will spin out. It can do donuts pretty easily, and it's a bit harder to kind of control the steering a bit, where the XRT has a bit more understeer, and you can control it a bit easier, especially at higher speeds. The XRT does not want to wheelie out here, though. It doesn't naturally wheelie like the X-Maxx does, although we could get the XRT to wheelie up this loading dock bay because it was at an angle. The X-Maxx, though, would just wheelie on the flat ground. It didn't care whether the traction was good or not, because when you squeeze the throttle and the weight of that body shifts back, it just puts all that weight on the rear tires and up it goes. Overall, the XRT probably performs a bit better on this type of a surface. It sits lower to the ground, it's a bit more agile, it's a bit more like a race truck, and if you were going to try to race on a surface like this, the XRT would probably spank the X-Maxx. Now, in this gravel lot, these little rocks are kind of like riding around on marbles, and both trucks slide around quite a bit. The understeer on the XRT makes it pretty easy to control and drive it really aggressively, hard on the throttle as you mash and bash around on these rocks. The X-Maxx does it too, but it definitely doesn't want to steer too much out here, and sometimes you can get it to 3-wheel around the corner. Steering on power is pretty difficult for the X-Maxx, though. Now, in this really chunky terrain, I don't think either truck had an advantage. You just give them enough throttle and they go up and over the chunky rocks and dirt clods. You do get a sense that the XRT is a bit more stable on this really chunky type of stuff, partially due to it being wider, so it wants to stay on the wheels, and partially due to the truck being lower. The weight's lower, it wants to hug the ground and stay on the tires. Chunkier terrain, it's a whole lot easier to roll the X-Maxx over on its lid, and you might be chasing it and flipping it over more often. Now, in this dirt parking lot, it's pretty similar to the gravel lot. Riding around on the dirt's pretty slick. There's lots of tire spin, there's lots of roost, and it became clear that driving the XRT in this type of an off-road setting, it feels like the XRT kind of sits more into the ground. It's settled into the terrain because it's lower, it's also heavier, but it just claws at the surface a bit more than the X-Maxx. The X-Maxx feels like it's almost skimming above the terrain, kind of just hydroplaning or gliding along the top rather than sitting in the dirt. Low traction levels, though, again, did not stop the X-Maxx from popping wheelies. It doesn't, no problem. You still get lots of body roll. It can go up on 2 wheels and bicycle pretty dang easily, and it's also easy out here to roll it over on its lid, where that's pretty difficult to do on the more stable XRT. Now, we threw both trucks on the track just to see how they would do in a more of a track competition setting, and the X-Maxx surprisingly got around the track pretty dang good. It's nice and cushy over the jumps, and the way that it oversteers a little bit helps slide the rear end around some of the tighter turns, helping it get around the tighter turns. The XRT on the track did just like you think it would. It is pretty much a race truck platform and it performs really well on the track. It's super stable, it jumps probably a little bit better than the X-Maxx, the way it takes off and soars through the air. It's just a little bit more stable in the air to control. And in this track-like settings, it's the superior truck. The one downside of the XRT on the track setting is its understeer. It's kind of harder to get it around some of those tighter turns. I have a feeling that since the truck sits lower and there's probably a bit more weight on the front tires, there's more strain on the servo in the XRT. And I'd be interested to see how tightening up the servo saver and putting a really strong servo would help it out on the track. Now, one thing we didn't think about is the XRT tires are pretty dang worn. So I wanted to see how the X-Maxx tires would do on the XRT on the track, and it actually ended up doing a whole lot better. There's a lot more traction. I even endoed slamming on the brakes because there was just so much bite on the front tires where I hadn't endoed in that spot before. Now, which truck is more fun? That is the question. I don't think many people are going to buy either of these trucks to go race, but there are a lot of backyard tracks out there, and for racing your buddies around, the XRT is better suited at putting down fast laps. And winning's always fun, so in this situation, the XRT is going to be funner. But what about for just bashing around and doing a little RC freestyle in pretty much any environment? Well, it really comes down to personal preferences, but I think for most people, the X-Maxx is going to deliver the most fun, the most thrilling, and the most exciting RC experience. The XRT is definitely great at being more predictable and stable and controllable, whereas the X-Maxx delivers a good dose of chaos. And sometimes that's just more fun. Guys, I'm Brett from AMain Hobbies, and go check out the X-Maxx and the XRT by following our links down below. And if you want more RC videos, check these out.